this time, I would ask members and guests to always please silence your phones. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Carroll.
Here.
Senator Deneen.
Here.
Senator Neal. Senator Nemes.
Present.
Senator Reed.
Here.
Senator Stivers.
Here.
Senator Thomas.
Here.
Vice Chair Wheeler.
Here.
Chair Storm.
Here.
It appears we have a quorum. We're duly constituted to do business. I want to talk about a few ground rules for a moment. We do have an overflow room in room 129. This room will be designated for seats only, so we will not have any standing. If you're welcome to go into the overflow room if you wish. We also request decorum in the room. No over-talking anyone who's presenting anything, no clapping, and be respectful. And we will not tolerate interruptions. At this time, does anyone have any guests they'd like to introduce? I have one. I would like to introduce Joe Ross, he's a Logan County attorney, and he's currently the president of the County Attorneys Association. Make him feel welcome. Next, we do have several people who've signed up to speak regarding Senate Bill 2. I would request those individuals who may have signed up to try to consult with one another, and you're all welcome to come to the table, but if we could have maybe 2 designated speakers to afford you probably 5 to 7 minutes, that would be great. At this time, we would ask Senator, please identify yourself and any guests you may have, and the floor is yours on Senate Bill 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator Mike Wilson, District 32, and I have before you Senate Bill 2 today. And if it's okay, I'll go ahead and proceed with the explanation of the bill.
Please proceed.
The bill's only like a page and maybe a quarter or half or third, something like that. It's a very simple bill. Bill just basically states that if you're incarcerated, you're not entitled to have cross-sex hormones or sex change operations to change your sex from one to another, male to female, female to male. That's simply what the bill does. The need for the bill is that back in 2021, the Department of Corrections did not come to do this by regulation or did not come to do it by statute, but we're providing these services to our inmates, to our prisoners, to those that are criminals in our prison system. And they were doing it by memo and became part of their policy. When they came and decided that they were going to do it by regulation to make it legal, so to speak, then they were asked to come and explain why this was needed and everything, and they refused to do that. They asked for an opinion from the Attorney General, and Attorney General told them, no, you don't have to provide these services. And at that point, they withdrew their regulations. The reason this is needed is to make sure that this is in statute so they don't go back to doing it illegally by memo. And so, Mr. Chairman, that is simply the bill, and I would hope that everybody would support that on the committee. And if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
Do we have any questions from members? Senator Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I'm sure it's no surprise that I would ask questions. So let me proceed by beginning to ask questions. Senator Wilson, how many of these gender reassignment surgeries have taken place or are taking place now here in Kentucky? What's that number?
Well, Senator, I would tell you that the Department of Corrections has told us there are none that have taken place to this point. However, the way that they went about introducing this into policy would call into question whether I could believe that or not.
May I ask some more, please, Chairman?
Sure.
Oh, thank you. Do we have any type of evidence, verifiable evidence, that their answer is incorrect? They've told you none. Do we have any evidence that there's been one or more than one has taken place?
Senator, I will tell you that they testified before the Regs Committee, and they testified out of 467 people that were incarcerated receiving these hormone therapy, 67 of them are receiving cross-sex hormones. So that in itself is something that would lead me to believe that in their policy it says that they provide those surgeries as well. So this is needed, Bill.
Well, that doesn't answer my question because you talked about a different process, and I'll get there in just a minute. But what I'm hearing right now is that we have no indication or no verifiable evidence that one gender reassignment surgery has taken place here in Kentucky. That's what I'm hearing you testify to today.
Is that a question, Senator?
Yes, that's a question.
Or is that a statement?
No, that's a question. Am I correct in saying that? I'm not hearing you tell me otherwise.
Based on their testimony, you are correct in saying that, but I would say this, that it's in their policy that they will provide that. So we can't really trust that they're not going to do that.
Okay. Now, let me...
Senator, you can have one last question. We have several people who have signed up to speak.
Okay. Let me ask this last question then, Mr. Chair. Okay. You indicated in your testimony this morning that there are 467 people that have received some sort of cross-sex
67 out of 467.
Oh, only 67?
Yes.
Only 67?
Yes.
Okay. Of that 67 number, is it not true that all of those have been medically prescribed by a licensed physician?
Senator, I would say they have to be prescribed by a physician, but just like they prescribe Ozempic or anything else that is something that is people want them to have, they want to have it, they get their doctor to prescribe it, it's not medically necessary, and Medicaid says it's not medically necessary.
Thank you.
That's my last question, Mark.
Yes. I'm sorry? Senator Neal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. I just want to ask one simple question. If it was deemed medically necessary, would you suggest or would you support the fact that it should be prescribed by the attorney? By the doctor, and
Senator,
and that advice be followed?
there is a portion of the bill at the last, you could take a look at it, that if the healthcare provider has initiated this course of treatment for an inmate and it includes the prescription or administration of any drug or medication for a cosmetic service or elective procedure, which those are, and the healthcare provider determines and documents that the inmate's medical record that immediately terminating the use of the drug or medication would cause physical harm to the inmate, the healthcare provider may institute a period during which the inmate's use of the drug or hormone is systematically reduced and eliminated. So I would agree with that portion of it. Yes, sir.
If it's medically necessary, would you support that service being
In that
provided?
instance,
I'm asking you.
in that instance, sir, that's what I'm saying.
Only in that narrow instance?
Yes,
Is that what
sir.
you're saying?
Yes, sir.
So outside of that, whether the doctor prescribed is medically necessary by the doctor's definition and determination, that would, if it doesn't fit that prescription in this document here, then you would not support that?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Neal. Thank you.
May I have one more question, please?
You said, could I ask one question?
May I ask one more?
This is your last question.
Thank you. So if, just want to know, do you have any medical training with respect to this?
Senator, you know that I do not.
Well, I just want to put it on the record because that's what we're doing here, right? Thank you.
Well, we do
Appreciate
that
it.
all the time, Senator. And
Appreciate it.
Senator
Thank you.
Wheeler.
Senator Wilson, we're talking about public tax dollars being
Yes,
used
sir.
for this. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Okay, we're not, and so would this come out of the Department of Corrections budget?
It would.
Okay. And this is an elective procedure.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. We did have some folks that signed up to speak. At this time, I would invite those individuals that signed up to speak to come to the table. You're welcome to come together. I would ask the group to understand we have a limited time here. It's 9:16. We have other bills on the agenda. And so 5 to 7 minutes, if you could perhaps designate 2 people to speak. And you have,
Mr.
after you
Chairman.
identify yourselves, if you could just, you have the floor.
If I could, we are all, many folks, very brief, about 1 minute each. If we could please get through as many as possible, with your discretion, of course, Mr. Chairman. My name
Identify
is
yourself for the record, please.
Chris Hartman. I'm Executive Director of the Fairness Campaign. This is my 17th legislative session. Senate Bill 2, I've sent you a fact sheet, would deny medically necessary health care for transgender people held in Kentucky's jails and prisons. It is a clear violation of the 8th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which has repeatedly been affirmed by federal courts. Less than 2 weeks ago, a U.S. district judge in Boston blocked the denial of hormone therapy for a transgender inmate. More than a decade ago, the U.S. Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals struck down a Wisconsin law that barred access to hormone treatment for transgender inmates. All inmates are entitled to health care, and that includes transgender inmates, whether it be for diabetes, cancer, or gender dysphoria. And all major medical associations agree that this is medically necessary care. I want to remind you, we're talking about 0.35% of the incarcerated population in Kentucky, 0.35%. This is a politically motivated attack against one of our smallest and most vulnerable communities, and you cannot tell me that this is one of the most pressing issues for the vast majority of Kentuckians. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for
Please
giving me...
identify yourself, please.
My name is Dr. Jack Skillis. I hold a doctorate in clinical psychology, a certificate of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and I'm the executive director of Mandala House, an outpatient mental health center that offers informed, affirming, and culturally responsive psychotherapy. It is our mission to provide care that is accessible for all members of our community across the organization. I'm an established member of the Kentucky Psychological Association and dedicate much of my time outside of clinic hours collaborating with other community-based organizations to connect Kentuckians to essential resources. I've been practicing psychology for more than 15 years, and I have clinical experience in relationships, identity development, sexual orientation, gender, multiculturalism, family of origin issues, shame, religious trauma, and attachment. Gender-affirming medical care is not experimental. It's not elective, and it's not cosmetic. Treatment for gender dysphoria is proven to be necessary for individuals to lead happy, healthy lives and is rooted in decades of scientific research, testing, and practice. The American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the National Commission on Correctional Healthcare all recognize healthcare for transgender people, including hormone therapy, as medically necessary treatments. Denying such care to those who are already suffering the negative consequences of incarceration is discriminatory and dangerous. Disrupting this medically necessary care will result in negative health outcomes, including increased anxiety, disturbances in social and familial relationships, depression, suicidality, and death. In my practice, I regularly work with transgender patients and know firsthand how damaging denying access to medically necessary care can be. Senate Bill 2 will damage the mental and physical health of people who are incarcerated in Kentucky's jails and prisons. Systems made of people are inherently challenging. They work best when all members are as healthy as possible. We know how to support the mental well-being of transgender and non-binary people, and it benefits the entire system when we ensure access to this critical care. I respectfully ask that you vote no to this bill.
Good afternoon or good morning, members of the.
Can you identify yourself,
yes,
please?
My name is Miss Hannah Callahan, and I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. Chair Storm, Vice Chair Wheeler, and members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you for letting me speak with you today. My name is Miss Hannah Callahan, and I'm a transgender woman living in Kentucky, specifically Lexington. Not long ago, I was incarcerated in a county jail in Indiana, and I wanted to share with you the very difficult experience that I had. Prior to my incarceration, I had been taking hormone therapy for many, many years, a treatment my doctor considered medically necessary. As a transgender woman, hormone treatment has been life-saving. I had my last hormone injection about a week before incarceration in county jail, where I found myself unable to receive my medical treatment for many, many weeks. Those weeks without medical treatment were an absolute nightmare. Suddenly, my body and mind began to change, and I had a rapid decrease in body fat and other physical side effects that triggered extreme gender dysphoria, body dysmorphia, and mental anguish. I suddenly became weak and lethargic. I spent most of my time in my bunk asleep. I didn't have a clear head, and my mind felt numb. My depression became so severe that I contemplated suicide. Ultimately, I nearly hung myself in my jail cell. Being denied my medically necessary health care was far worse punishment than the one that I actually received from the actual judge. I personally know at least a half a dozen Kentuckians that this bill would impact today. Please don't subject them to the cruelty I experienced. You could be sentencing them to death without meaning to. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and I concede my time.
Motion on the bill.
We have, it's been about almost 6 minutes. You have 1 minute.
Thank
Please
you, Mr.
identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee. My name is Emma Curtis. I'm 28 years old, and I currently serve as the councilwoman for Lexington's 4th District, and I'm also the only openly transgender person currently holding a public office in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So I just want to say very quickly that I recognize that speaking up for transgender inmates is not a politically easy thing to do, but it is the right thing to do. In my life, my faith, my family taught me to do what is right and not what is easy, so I'm asking you to do that and vote no on Senate Bill 2 today, because this is doing something that is going to hurt a tiny portion of the population, and by denying them medically necessary care. Despite what the sponsor says, every single medical organization in the world confirms that hormone therapy for transgender people is medically necessary. It is not cosmetic. It is not elective. It is literally life-saving. Now, I've spent my entire life in the Christian tradition, as I know many of you have, and I'd like to remind you of what Scripture tells us in the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 44 and 45. They will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" And he will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." I ask you to heed those words, to act in a Christ-like manner, and to vote no on Senate Bill 2.
Thank you for your presentation. We have a motion on the bill by Senator Wheeler. We have a second. Senator Reed made a second. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Carroll. Aye. Senator Deneen. Aye. Senator Neal.
I'd like to explain my no vote.
3 minutes.
My concern is that I'm not a doctor. I'm not trained in this. I defer to a doctor who's trained in these types of matters, and it's been testified to the Medical Association. In fact, there's no medical association that I'm aware of that says anything other than it is medically necessary. When it's medically necessary, that it should be prescribed and should be carried out. I'm not going to put myself in the place of a doctor, which I have no training in, and which maybe someone on this panel does. I would like to speak with you about it. But without some other information like that, I'd have to vote no. Thank you.
Senator Nemes.
I'd like to explain my past vote.
Please proceed.
I think the intent of this bill is not to have the state pay for operations that are elective while people are in prison. I don't think the intent of the bill is to deny medical treatment that they're already receiving, and I need clarification that that does not stop that. So I'm going to pass now.
Senator Reed.
Vote yes.
Senator Stivers.
Aye.
Senator Thomas.
I'm going to explain my no vote, Mr. Chair.
Proceed.
Let's begin by the obvious. There's no fiscal note attached to this bill, which means that whatever the cost of stopping to do this medically necessary treatment is not busting the state's budget. Okay, So we're not damaging the state budget by treating 67 people. That's what we heard today. The testimony is we're treating 67 people, and we're not impacting the state budget one bit from doing that. No fiscal note here. Number two, to a point that Senator Neal made that I think deserves emphasis. Both the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association, two prominent and highly respected associations that deal with medical treatment in this country, all say that this kind of hormone therapy is medically necessary. I mean, if you can't trust them to identify what's medically necessary and what's important for people's mental health, you can't trust anybody. Okay. I guess here's my biggest point. This is Senate Bill 2, folks. This is the second top priority of the Senate. We've got over 600,000 children now on Medicaid living in poverty. We've got a workforce participation rate that's barely over 50%, far below the national average. A lot of that's to do because it's easier for them not to work and get state assistance than to work. They're getting low wages as tradespeople, as educators. We can't even discuss minimum wage here in this body. We're not paying people enough to do that. And yet our second priority is that we want to deny 67 people medically necessary treatment. In my mind, that's a distortion of priorities. And so for all of those reasons, I realize I'm at 2 minutes and 45 seconds. I got 15 seconds. So for all of those reasons that I've just articulated today, in the short time I have, I proudly vote no on this bill.
Senator Wheeler.
I vote aye, Mr. Chairman. Explain my vote.
Please.
I would remind my colleagues that the American Medical Association endorsed cigarettes for probably 40 or 50 years before they changed their mind. So just because they're onto something one day doesn't necessarily mean that they're correct.
Chair Storm.
Aye. The bill passed. Senate Bill 2 is reported favorably with the expression of opinion the same should pass. Thank you all. This time we'll hear Senate Bill 84, which is next on the agenda, relating to judicial review of state agency action, sponsored by Senator Rawlings. Senator, if you could, just please identify yourself and any guests you might have for the record, and the floor is yours.
Steve Rawlings, Senate District 11. So this bill, it's commonly called Chevron deference. So Senate Bill 84 is a bill that curbs agency overreach and ensures fair judicial review. This bill increases government accountability by ensuring that courts do not defer to state agencies in interpretations of our laws. For decades, the Chevron doctrine let courts defer to agency interpretations of so-called ambiguous laws, thereby expanding bureaucratic power. In 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Chevron, reaffirming that courts, not agencies, interpret laws. That case was Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, and it concluded that the doctrine was unworkable and unpredictable. The court majority concluded that the doctrine allowed federal agencies to expand their regulatory powers beyond what Congress intended. Without similar protections at the state level, Kentucky agencies could still push their authority beyond what lawmakers intended, as has been the case on several occasions. This bill will restore judicial independence and ensure that courts, not bureaucratic agencies, have the final say interpreting the law. By limiting agency overreach, we are reaffirming the constitutional separation of powers and protecting the rights of Kentuckians. The repudiation of Chevron deference stabilizes state law and ends this arbitrary and undemocratic scheme. By passage of Senate Bill 84, the Kentucky State Legislature will reclaim its role in setting state policy and will remain the sole authority to create laws. So you all have seen national news on the administrative state and the problems that we've had with agencies growing so strong that they've become known as the fourth branch of government. And it's a concept that carries down to the state level as well. So the Supreme Court case ruled on this last year on its constitutionality, and we need to do the same in the state of Kentucky on Senate Bill 84. Thank you.
Motion on the bill.
Do we have any questions for the motion on the bill? Oh, President Stivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rawlings, a lot of people I don't think deal in the world of law and regulatory process. Mm-hmm. So correct me if I am wrong. So legislative bodies, which in this case that brought on the Chevron deference, passes a law giving administrative agencies the ability to pass regulations within the confines of those laws. Am I correct?
Correct. They create regulations. They fine people. They institute charges for things. They go way beyond their scope, way beyond what the Constitution ever intended.
If I can continue, Ms.
Yes.
And with that, if it is perceived by an entity that the regulatory agency has gone outside of the statutory grant of authority,
yes,
the courts were deferring to the agency to be the interpreter of the statutory authority, not the legislature or legislative body, nor the courts. And that's what your bill would do, is restore the power and make clear it is the legislative body that writes the parameters, and it is the courts who interpret that, not the agency.
Absolutely.
That's all I have.
Yeah, so the courts interpret the laws. That's how it was set up constitutionally, separation of powers. There was no allowance for these regulatory bureaucracies and unelected bureaucrats to have this much power.
We have a motion by Senator Wheeler. We have a second by Senator Stivers. Senator Neal, very quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be clear. This does not stop the regulatory agency for carrying out its work. It just means that the court does not defer to them, and therefore if someone challenges that, then the court can step in and make a determination of whether the action was reasonable or not or whatever. Is that what it does?
Correct. So the court is to make that interpretation, not the agencies.
But it does not stop the functioning of the
Right.
agency to carry out what it carries out now. But the ultimate and the final interpretive authority would be the court.
That's correct. Most definitely, your point is correct.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Carroll. Aye. Senator Deneen. Aye. Senator Neal. Aye. Senator Nemus.
Aye.
Senator Reed.
Yes.
Sorry, microphone wasn't on, but yes, I'd like to explain my vote, and I appreciate you bringing this bill, Senator. I vote yes, and I hope this bill can serve as an example for the federal government to follow as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Stivers.
Aye.
Senator Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to explain my aye vote.
Please proceed.
Mr. Chair, this is the Judiciary Committee, and we talk about very important issues of law. And I do think going forward that there ought to be a little bit more debate on certain legal issues. I've read the Raimondo decision. Matter of fact, I like the Raimondo decision, and that's why I'm going to vote for the bill. But I would view it differently than what's been articulated here this morning, because under case law now, under Kentucky jurisprudence, if an agency goes beyond the reach of the statute, courts have the authority now to strike that down. No agency can go beyond their statutory authority. Courts will strike that down now. Now, do I agree that courts should generally give deference to administrative agencies? No, I think the Raimondo decision is absolutely correct there, that courts ought to be able to take a de novo look, and that's just a legal term for new look, to look at a decision. And what courts should do is give the agency's decision some weight, some credible weight, but then weigh that against other factors that the court may think is better public policy and make a decision. So I would not go as far here to say that the agency decision is not entitled to any deference. It may not be entitled to ultimate deference, but it should be given some weight here. That's where I part ways with this bill. I would probably file a 4 amendment at least to raise that, because I think agencies do deserve, some consideration. But again, I think this bill's a step in the right direction. I think Ramondo's a step in the right direction. And so for that reason, I vote aye.
Senator Wheeler.
Aye.
Chair Storm.
Aye. Senate Bill 84 is reported favorably with the expression of opinion the same should pass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
This time we'll turn to Senate Bill 111, last on our agenda, an act relating to juvenile justice sponsored by Senator Carroll. Senator, if you could just identify yourself and your guest for the record, and then you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Danny Carroll, the state senator from the 2nd District.
Eric Friedlander, Secretary of the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. Randy White, Commissioner, Department of Juvenile Justice.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's an honor to be here today to present Senate Bill 111. This is a very detailed bill. I'm going to move through the sections of this bill fairly quickly. This bill is a result of the work of a DJJ task force working group that was put together a couple years ago. We spent basically the entire month of January working on DJJ issues. And as you all know, the Department of Justice has been in town and has investigated the issues surrounding DJJ detention centers, and there is a good likelihood that we will once again be under a consent decree at some point. In an effort to correct the situations within DJJ, there were many recommendations that were put forth by that working group, and there have been countless meetings with the Cabinet, DJJ, CHFS, the Kentucky Hospital Association, various providers, the Administrative Office of Courts. Many stakeholders have been involved in the preparation of this bill and the content of this bill. It will not solve all the problems that we are facing in DJJ. Commissioner White will likely speak to some of the steps that he has taken since he has been in DJJ as commissioner to resolve some of the other issues the organization is facing at this point. This bill primarily addresses those kids that are served within the Cabinet Health and Family Services and are DJJ involved that are acutely mentally ill. I'll start with the sections on this bill. And in Section 1, it sets forth the process on the determination of high acuity youth, and the process determine the location for where these youth shall receive treatment. It establishes a process by which a juvenile taken into custody by DJJ or a youth committed to CHFS receives a behavioral assessment to determine whether or not the youth qualifies as a high acuity youth. It sets in a process whereby the kid is evaluated, DCBS, DJJ are consulted. If there is an agreement on the treatment that the child needs, there's affidavits submitted to a judge. If there are disagreements, there are affidavits submitted to a judge, and the judge makes final determination on the treatment and placement of these individuals. There are problems within the state right now of certain facilities not wanting to take kids who have a high acuity mental illness due to behavioral issues, and a little later on in the bill we address that also. The bill in Section 1 also establishes the DMS reimbursement rate for inpatient psychiatric hospitals and pediatric teaching hospitals that provide inpatient treatment to high acuity youth at 200% of the current Medicaid rate. It establishes the outpatient rate for these services at 150% of the current rate. And it also establishes a process to remove high acuity youth from hospitals if the youth commits acts of violence or incites violence. And it's important to understand that has kind of been a key to this whole issue. There are many of these hospitals that are reluctant to take these kids because under current statute, as it is interpreted, once they receive these children, they have to keep these children. If they assault staff, they still have to keep the children. Police will not remove them from the facility. This bill corrects that in that it has a process whereby they can be removed, and then it comes into the next part of this bill comes into play in the establishment of a high acuity youth detention center. That would be the highest level of care for these high acuity violent children in our Commonwealth. This facility would serve those children who are currently incarcerated or detained in juvenile detention centers, who are living in cells. You all have heard the stories over recent years. The young lady in particular who would be stripped. She stripped herself of her clothes. She was lying in feces, minimal treatment, just abhorrent situation, and not getting the care that she needed. And we still have kids in facilities today that are in juvenile detention centers. Although I feel the treatment has gotten better, they're still not where they need to be and where they can receive the best care and the safest environment for their situation. In Section 1, it also provides for a process for high acuity youth to move to a lower continuum of care if the treating physician determines that the current level of care is no longer needed. So it's placement, but it also accounts for a process if they are at this highest level of psychiatric hospitals where they can go down to a lower level of care. In Section 2, it requires DJJ, and this gets into some issues surrounding DJJ in addressing some of the issues that the working group recognized and what we have made adjustments to as we have moved along this process in some of their processes and some of their needs within DJJ. It requires DJJ to operate at least 2 female-only detention centers for female offenders, and they shall segregate violent from nonviolent offenders. As it stands right now in statute that we have passed, that this body, state legislature has passed, we have required DJJ to go back to the regional model, housing both male and female, violent and nonviolent in the current facilities. In our regional facility model, that is simply not possible. To go back in and renovate and to add on to each one of these regional facilities to house male, female, and separate violent from nonviolent, the cost would exceed, I believe, would exceed what the cost would be to build 2 standalone female detention centers. And this bill does call for the construction of those centers. One would be located in central Kentucky, one in western Kentucky, with provisions that as the census dictates for female offenders, a third would either be built in eastern Kentucky or northern Kentucky, depending on what the statistics show on where these females come from. Section 3 of the bill is definition. Section 4 is that provision that has been removed primarily. It had to do with House Bill 3 from 2023, but it has language related to that bill that is present in this bill. The bill last year basically just delayed the onset of that bill taking effect, and that has been removed. Section 5 is language that was added for DJJ. It has to do with the confidentiality of juvenile records. It clarifies that any juvenile record obtained by a public official may be used within the scope of their employment, but shall not be disclosed to any third party without a court order. It also establishes that when an adult or juvenile who is subject to information designated confidential publicly reveals or causes to reveal any significant part of the confidential matter or information by filing a civil suit, the confidentiality shall be presumed voluntarily waived, and DJJ or the Justice Cabinet may, in the defense of the litigation, disclose confidential information in records about the person or causing the public disclosure, including information that has not previously been disclosed but is related to the information made public. Section 6, it was a removal of the confusion language that I just spoke of related to hospitals' ability to remove violent children who are in their care who have assaulted or incited violence. It does allow for law enforcement to take custody of those youth and sets forth the process where they would be properly placed within the proper facility. And normally, again, this would be the high acuity mental health detention center as the highest level of care.
Motion on the bill.
Second.
Before we get there, actually, we have a motion by Senator Wheeler, and who made the second? Senator Nemes made the second. But before we get there, I need to ask you, Senator, is there a fiscal note on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, I have a note from budget staff. It is not on the official document. They are getting this information transferred to that official document as we speak. The cost that I have on this would be $45 million each for the female detention centers, and then an additional $5 million to do the design work for the high acuity mental health detention center. And I do also want to add that there's been a lot of discussion, and I think last year with this bill, the reason it did not make it through the entire process was the cost associated with the two female detention centers. And understand, I fully support the move to this model. Right now, we have one center that is utilized to detain females. When Senate Bill or House Bill 3 went into effect, there was a spike in the female population. And my understanding is they almost reached capacity within that facility. The commissioner, I'm sure, can speak to that further. I think it has somewhat leveled off at this point. But if we are looking at the care of the females and we are looking at the distance that counties have to travel to house female offenders, the model that we have set forth, I believe, is the correct solution. However, if the cost of that causes this bill to die, I'm willing to remove that provision from the bill to ensure that we get the mental health process in place to address these issues within DJJ.
President Stivers has a question.
Actually, Mr. Chair, response to your question, Senator Carroll and I discussed this fiscal note. We understand the nature of it. I advised him to keep it in the price tag, knowing that whether or not we open up the budget this session becomes a question. But everybody needs to understand implementation of this bill, which I think everyone knows is probably needed, will come with a price tag. If not this year, it will probably come next year. And that portion of construction may need, as we go through the process, need to be taken out until we do open up a budget. That's all.
Senator Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I generally think this is a no-brainer in terms of direction it's going. I commend you on this action. There is a question there. This issue of a juvenile, if I heard it correctly, would waive the confidentiality if they pursued a complaint. I believe it's Section 5. I'm not sure I have that right. I just wanted to know why would that requirement or why would that be permitted?
Commissioner, do you want to address that? Or I know a little bit more of the history of the language, but you may be more familiar with the reasoning.
Yes, sir. I think I can elaborate a little bit operationally. If a juvenile gets away from our custody, whether through AWOL, and I think this is the context of your question, Senator, if they do go AWOL from one of our facilities or they escape from one of our facilities, safety and apprehension of this juvenile when they get them back in our custody where they'll be safe is very important to us, obviously. And not able to identify who the juvenile is, until we can get a court order, often there's a delay in distributing the information publicly. And so what we want to do is to try to get that information out publicly quicker, so that it will enable us to try to apprehend this juvenile quicker, get them back into our custody. Because if they do leave our custody and they go AWOL and they're out in the community, often they'll commit acts of desperation, trying to facilitate the AWOL or the escape. And so there's victims in the community that's potential as well.
If I may follow that, help me with this, if you will. So I'm thinking that the waiver is tied to the juvenile bringing a complaint.
It's not a complaint. It would be a civil suit. And what happens in many of these cases is there is a civil suit filed, there's information made public, and because it is a juvenile, there is no ability for the cabinet to defend themselves in any way in the public arena. So this would allow information that would normally be confidential to be released, to allow DJJ or the cabinet or DCBS or the cabinet to defend themselves in these issues. And this was a request, Secretary Harvey, when he was here, this was language that he wanted added to the bill. And I think due to a lot of the issues that had happened and stories come out, the DJJ or whoever gets slammed by the media, and oftentimes those facts are incomplete. The details are incomplete. There's nothing that DJJ can do to defend themselves. This would allow them to release information that would normally be confidential in an effort to be able to defend themselves. And so in a way, the public understands that things aren't quite what they seem to be, and it alleviates some of the fears in the community on perhaps some of the inner workings of DJJ and detention centers, and it helps foster the truth being released rather than a partial truth. And we've all witnessed this throughout our careers where there are times that you just have no ability to defend yourself because if you run a nonprofit or a business, there are certain things that are just confidential that you can't defend yourself with, and this would alleviate some of those issues.
Thank you.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I want to confirm Senator Carroll's testimony about the $50 million price tag. I just want to inform members of this committee that just on Tuesday night, the government contract subcommittee met. And during that meeting, we received requests for $50 million to correct or rehabilitate juvenile justice facilities. In fact, Dr. Freelander was at that meeting. After some debate, the subcommittee did approve that $50 million request, but that's what we had to appropriate or approve just on Tuesday to move forward with the building of these juvenile justice facilities. So that $50 million price tag does sound about right. I'm not going to say we should reopen the budget. I'm going to defer that to the Senate President. That's his call. But again, this is costly. It's going to cost us a lot of money to get this right and to construct and develop facilities that are going to satisfy both our needs and the concern of the United States Department of Justice.
Yes, sir. And Senator, I think that's correct. And understand that this is being done in various phases. We have already directed DJJ to renovate the existing. We've directed them to go back to the regional model first. We've directed them to separate violent and nonviolent. As it stands right now, they're directed to separate violent, nonviolent, male-female in these regional centers. That's the part of the need for the two female centers. The females are being housed in one separate facility as we speak. So each one of these centers is going to have to be renovated to a certain extent to separate violent and nonviolent. And then the issue with the mental health detention center, something entirely different. I would encourage each one of you, if you get a chance, look up South Carolina Mental Health Detention Center. While we were in the process of trying to solve this problem, and before we came up with the idea of building this facility, Apparently, South Carolina was having the same conversations, and late last year they broke ground on a 24-bed facility to serve these youth. The same conversations that we had, apparently South Carolina was having also. Their price tag for that one was about $24 million, I believe 22 or 24, but basically the same process, the same center that we plan to build also, roughly the same cost for that facility at $22 million.
We have a motion and a second on the bill. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Carroll.
Aye.
Senator Deneen.
Aye.
Senator Neal.
I want to explain my aye vote. I want to commend the senator on bringing this bill. I think it's right thinking. I do still have some questions. I understand the rationale better now. But I want to look at it a little bit further and discuss with you along the line. Thank you. Aye.
Senator Nemus.
Aye.
Senator Reed.
Aye.
Senator Stivers.
Explain my vote. Yes, please. I have an aye vote, but I would also suggest if you reach capacity, and I've suggested this to the cabinet and Senator Carroll and others, that there is a dormant private facility in Marion County that could be accessed possibly for, and nothing's more central, especially according to Jimmy Higdon, than Marion County. But there is a dormant facility there that could possibly be leased for the purpose of housing some of the juveniles.
Senator Thomas.
Aye.
Senator Wheeler.
Aye.
Chair Storm.
Aye. Senate Bill 11 is reported favorably with the expression of opinion that same should pass.
Yeah.
111. 111.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, if I could take a moment to just state how much I appreciate the cabinets, the Hospital Association, Administrative Office of Courts. This was very much a collaborative effort and many other stakeholders that pulled all this together. It's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career in the Senate, and my hope is we can move this forward because I truly believe there are some answers. This, combined with the work that these two gentlemen are doing in DJJ with Commissioner White, personnel changes, philosophical changes, cultural changes in environment, it's all taking place within DJJ now, and I think they are truly doing their best to get our program up to standards. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We are adjourned.